Hey, how's it going everyone? Jacob here at Explosive Woodworks, and today I'm going to show you how I built this outfeed table, so stick around. For this project, I used 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. I also used 3/4 inch oak veneer plywood for the top as well. I started by cutting it down with my Festool track saw into more manageable sized pieces. Now for this you don't have to have a track saw, you can also use just a circular saw and a straight edge of some type. I then moved on to ripping down all the pieces that I needed for the frame and the legs. Once everything was ripped down to size, I moved on to the miter saw and cut everything to length as needed. I then moved on to assembling the frame by using brad nails, glue, and drywall screws. I made sure to countersink the screws enough that I could fill the holes with plugs afterwards. This will help keep those unsightly screw holes from being that noticeable at least. Now one thing that I had forgotten to do at this point was to cut in the pocket holes that I had planned to use to attach the frame to the top and to the bottom shelf. So I just went ahead and used a single Kreg jig and put the pocket holes in at that point. Now I had to offset the frame from the top in order to account for the feet on the table saw, so that's something to keep in mind when you go to build yours. It may not be the same as mine. The top and bottom are built in the same fashion, minus that the top of the bottom shelf has to be cut just slightly bigger than the frame and then trimmed down with a flush trim bit so that it will fit inside the L-shaped legs. I used some scrap plywood and clamps to hold the bottom shelf up in place while I attached it. Now this is a good little tip as it holds it right on line to where your measurements are. For plugging the screw holes, I just used some standard 3/8 inch dowel that you can get at any home store, and I just cut it out on the bandsaw into small pieces, glued it in place, and then trimmed it with a flush trim saw and a chisel. Once that was done, I just went through and sanded the frame and added my adjustable feet. I went with the Rockler adjustable feet and they worked out great. Once the feet were on and I was able to stand the outfeed table upright, I went on to laminating the oak veneered plywood onto the top. You're going to want to make sure you have a lot of clamps and heavy items for this part. While the top was drying, I went on to milling the oak that I was going to use for the trim of the top of the table. I started by just running the boards through the planer real quick in order to clean them up, and then I moved on to cutting a nice edge with my track saw. This is a great alternative if you don't have a jointer, which I'm still waiting on mine to show up. With the nice clean edge, I just went onto the table saw and ripped them down to size. By the time I was done with that, the top of the table was dry enough that I could move on with a flush trim router and clean it up and get ready for the trim pieces. For the trim, I just simply used butt joints, so I was able to just trim it down on the miter saw real quick and put it in place with glue, brad nails, and screws again. When I ripped down the trim, I oversized it so that I could come back with a flush trim bit to make sure that it's perfectly in line with the top. Then I just put a nice chamfer on it and it was ready for sanding. Now after sanding the top, I put on 2 coats of General Finishes Armor Seal. Now the reason I chose Armor Seal is I used it on my router table insert that I put in my rigid table saw, and it has held up really good, and I just think the durability is going to be the best for this. I also chose to use Armor Seal because I like the amber effect that it does when it dries. I think it just makes it look a little bit better. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments down below. And please stay tuned for next week's video, which I'm hoping to have on time, but we'll see. So, catch you guys later.